Jai Hind, Namaste, hello and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav and in this video we'll be covering selected topics from the Hindu and Indian Express for the date 26th of September 2020. Now in this video we'll be covering the following topics. Vodafone wins 2 billion tax case. So this is a judgment by the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague and it has favored Vodafone. So we will see what the Vodafone case was all about. I will also tell you what retrospective taxation means. We will also get to know about the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague and we'll also see how the government of India is responding. So we'll see the whole chronology of this case, right? Then Facebook critics start rival independent oversight board. So basically Facebook announced in 2018 that it would be forming an independent oversight board which would actually check the hate content on Facebook and Instagram. But Facebook still has not constituted the board. So its prominent critics, including one of the Facebook founders who also went to jail because of whatever corporate thing happened with Facebook. So he is also part of that group that are forming this oversight board. They are saying that already the Facebook platform is being used to influence the presidential election in US. So it brings up a lot of questions. So we'll see the whole issue of this oversight board. Then IRDAI, which is the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India, which is the regulator of insurance sector in India, lists LIC, GIC and New India as systematically important insurers. So we'll see what are domestic systematic important insurers that these three companies have been made. So what are the liabilities that they would have now they have been made systematically important? What are the criterias for being systematically important? And why have they been made systematically important? We'll see everything about it. Then faceless IT comes into operation. So there has been a reform in the income tax process. So this is basically to honor the honest taxpayer and also ease the process and reduce the human contact points, which basically reduces the space for corruption, which is a good thing. So we'll see what this faceless IT system is all about. Then another CAG report that 223 crore upgrade for 56 Mi-17s medium lift helicopters is untenable. So we will see what this report is saying, because basically this proposal was initially flouted in 2002. It was signed in 2017. Now the end life of these helicopters is 2024. So CAG is saying that now you are even retrofitting them and they would be operational by 2022. Right? And their lifespan is till 2024. So for just 2 years, you're paying 223 crore. And in addition, there's also 1800 crore accessory package that was meant for these. So basically it's a 2000 crore thing. And CAG is saying that it is useless because these helicopters have only 2 years left. So we'll see this. Then National Medical Commission. Now National Medical Commission has come to replace the Medical Council of India. So we'll see what the National Medical Commission is. It basically has 4 independent autonomous boards to cover the medical education from undergraduate to post-graduation, and even the ethics, everything is covered under this. And we'll also see about NEXT, which is a licentiate examination. That means anybody who passes MBBS in India would have to appear for NEXT, and only after passing the next examination would they be able to practice in India or to go for higher education. The next examination would also be required for people who come from abroad after doing their medical studies, and they need to convert their licenses into Indian license through the next examination. So we'll see all about that. Then new guidelines to regulate extraction of groundwater. Now India has seen unabated extraction of groundwater, especially in the Green Revolution belt, because of the use of the pumps and the free and subsidized electricity and whatnot. So the groundwater level has gone down abysmally low in many districts. So center has rightfully come out with new guidelines. So it makes getting of NOC mandatory for certain categories like group housing societies and industries, so that they can extract groundwater and they will have to pay user charges for extracting groundwater. So what are those charges and what is this whole regime of guidelines? We'll get to know, right? So these are all the topics that we'll be discussing in this video. So let's get started. Vodafone wins 2 billion tax case. Now very interesting case and very important news, because this has been going on since 2007. right? So we'll get to know the whole background of this Vodafone case, how it came to be, then the award of the International Tribunal. I'll also be telling you something about the International Tribunal. So let's see what the article is saying. An international arbitration tribunal in The Hague ruled that India's imposition of tax liability on Vodafone, as well as interest and penalties, were in a breach of investment treaty agreement between India and Netherlands. So basically what happens, I have told you earlier that there are two things. One is tax evasion, right? And the other is tax avoidance. Now what is the difference between the two? Avoidance is a legal method where you use legal procedures and legal instruments to basically avoid tax, but an evasion is an illegal method where you use crooked means to basically save your tax. So this Vodafone deal was basically between Vodafone and Hutch. There used to be a Hutch mobile company in India. So in 2007 they signed a deal with Hutch. Now this deal was specifically designed as per Indian authorities to avoid paying tax in India. And how? Because Vodafone made a subsidiary, Vodafone International Communications, and it incorporated that company in the Netherlands. Now India had a BIT or a bilateral investment treaty with the Netherlands, and as per this treaty, Vodafone was liable to pay tax at only one jurisdiction. So they said that we are registered in Netherlands and we will be paying tax there. So we have no tax liability in India. Now the tax liability, it came out to be very, very huge. So in 2012, when Mr. Pranab Mukherjee was the finance minister, so he came out with a proposal in the budget to tax this deal with a retrospective tax clause. Now retrospective tax clause means that though the law was passed in 2012, it was applicable from 2007. That means it would cover the Vodafone deal as well. Now this went on for a very long time. Vodafone went to Supreme Court, then Supreme Court said that Vodafone does not have to pay the tax, then again some amendments. Then finally, both Vodafone and Government of India agreed to go to The Hague, which is an international arbitration tribunal. Now arbitration is a process where both the parties come together and they agree for a solution, and they nominate their own members, the members chosen by them, to be on the arbitration panel, and then a decision comes and that decision is binding on both the parties. So finally, now in 2020, the Permanent Arbitration Tribunal at The Hague has given a decision in favor of Vodafone, and it says that India should not harass Vodafone for tax. In fact, it has imposed the liability on Government of India to pay Vodafone for the legal costs that Vodafone has incurred so far. So let us quickly see what this case is all about. What was the case? It all started in 2007. Let us take a quick look at the whole case. Now in 2007, Vodafone closes a 11 billion deal under which it purchased Indian mobile assets from Hutchison. September 2007, India's income tax department raises a demand of 79,990 crore. So initially it was around 8,000 crore rupees, which was a substantial amount and which is still a substantial amount. In capital gains tax. Now what is capital gains tax? Whenever you make a deal and you gain a profit, for example, you sell a property and the profit that you make in selling the property, it comes under capital gains, and on that capital gain you have to pay a tax, and that is known as capital gain tax. So similarly, Vodafone bought Hutchison, and for that it was liable to pay a capital gains tax as per Indian tax authorities worth 8,000 crore in 2007. January 2012, relief for Vodafone as Supreme Court rules that IT department cannot levy tax on the deal. So like I said, there was a relief, but then the then finance minister, late Shri Pranab Mukherjee, he came out with a proposal in the finance bill for the budget that year to impose a retrospective tax. So Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee proposes changes to the finance bill seeking to tax such deals where both the buyer and the seller are located outside India. So this is the whole thing, that Hutchison and Vodafone deliberately got into that deal to avoid paying tax in India. That was tax evasion. The amendments have retrospective implications, thus bringing the Vodafone deal under fold. But Vodafone was not happy because it was liable to pay. So in April 2012, Vodafone invokes the bilateral investment treaty. which India had with Netherlands because they made a subsidiary and registered in Netherlands and issued a notice to Indian government to initiate arbitration proceedings. Now, as per this BIT agreement, both the countries have to treat neutrally or impartially each other's companies, and they could go to arbitration proceedings. So under this BIT agreement, Vodafone initiated arbitration proceedings. January 2013, again I told you that there were some amendments. So Vodafone receives a revised tax demand notice of 14,200 crore including interest. So originally it was around 8,000 crore. Now in 2013 with interest it came out to be 14,200 crore. June 2013, the Union Cabinet clears proposal of a settlement of dispute through a non-binding conciliation. That means that we will go for conciliation, but it won't be binding on us. That means if we are not agreeing to the conciliation, then again we can seek further legal remedies. In January 2014, Vodafone challenges the government's tax demand under the Netherlands-India BIT. July 2014, Finance Minister Arun Jaitley says in budget speech that the NDA government will not retrospectively create a fresh tax liability. All fresh cases arising out of retrospective amendments will be scrutinized by a high-level committee before any action is initiated. So, Vodafone got some hopes. In February 2016, Vodafone receives another tax demand. So, Vodafone was having some hopes, but it again got a tax demand. So, from around 8,000 crore to 14,200 crore, and finally in 2016, 22,100 crore including interests. Then in January 2017, Vodafone again serves an arbitration notice under the UK-India BIT. So the Netherlands-India BIT did not work out for them. So they basically filed under UK-India BIT because Vodafone is originally registered as a company in the UK and they had also made a subsidiary registered in the Netherlands. In December 2017, the Supreme Court allows Vodafone to initiate the second arbitration after Delhi High Court restrained the company from doing so. So they went to the Supreme Court and Supreme Court allowed them to go for arbitration. Now that arbitration was carried out, and in September 2020, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague rules in favor of Vodafone, says that the Indian government's demand of retrospective tax in breach of guarantee of fair and equitable treatment. So this is the final treatment, but the finance minister said that we'll first read the judgment and then we'll consult our legal experts and then we'll see what has to be done, including seeking legal remedies if there is a case. Now this is important in a number of ways, and I'll tell you in a bit why this judgment and what is the significance of this case for India. Now let us further see what the article is saying. Now what is retrospective taxation? Like I said, for example, we are in 2020. Today I make a tax law and I say that all the transactions from 2010 that have taken place are covered under this tax law. So whatever transaction you might have made in 2011, and if you are liable to pay under this tax law, then you better pay me. This is retrospective taxation. Okay. So it allows a country to pass a rule on taxing certain products, items or services and deals and charge companies from a time behind the date on which the law is passed. Now what did the tribunal say? The tribunal in its ruling said the government's demand is in breach of fair and equitable treatment and it must cease seeking the dues from Vodafone. And it also directed Government of India to pay 4.3 million pounds to the company as compensation for its legal costs. Now the government's response, like I said, Finance Minister said that we'd carefully study the award, consider all options and then decide further course of action including legal remedies. Now what is the significance of this? Now it is very important because India is also engaged in similar conflicts or legal battles with other companies. So as a matter of fact, we have terminated our BITs with more than 50 countries to seek the tax because these companies have swindled us in a big way. So let us see the significance. Vodafone's win in the arbitration against the government in the retrospective taxation is very significant, as it may cause other similarly placed companies to seek arbitral reliefs. Now they might say that since Vodafone has got the relief, then we are also, because by the principle of equality of law, we are also entitled to such a relief. India is entangled in more than a dozen of such cases against companies over retrospective tax claims and cancellation of contracts. The exchequer could end up paying billions of dollars in damages if it loses. So this is very crucial. To further reduce arbitration claims, India has ended such bilateral investment agreements with over 50 countries and is working on new laws to protect foreign investors by offering relief from possible policy changes, even as it upholds the right to tax them. Now again, it is important because in international fora, India was being targeted and it was being tagged as tax terrorism, that India is engaging in tax terrorism, and due to that many companies were averse to investing in India. But now we know that we need foreign investment because of the economic downturn, which was further aggravated by the corona pandemic and the changing global geopolitical and economic scenario. There is a possibility that more and more companies could come to India in the light of them leaving China. But we need to increase our ease of doing business, or we need to make the atmosphere predictable, because any company would want to invest in India if the business environment is predictable. For example, you sign a deal with Government of India, which is now Party A. Now after 5 years, Party B comes to power and they seek fresh demands from you. Then you as a businessman would stand to lose a lot. So you would be averse to making such an investment. So you always seek that there is continuity and stability in policy. So to enable them, government is coming up with new policy changes so that the companies could have continuity and predictability in policy, so that they can also plan accordingly their future projections. The victory of Vodafone at PCA may provide it some relief, as the telecom sector is already facing a number of issues and challenges. For example, I told you in first or second video about the adjusted gross revenue concept. Already the companies are reeling under heavy burden and there are many inherent problems of the telecom sector in India. So they are not doing that well. So had Vodafone been asked to pay this money again, then it would have made its business in India almost impossible. So this is also a sort of relief. The ruling comes 10 days after Supreme Court allowed a period of 10 years for telecom companies to clear adjusted gross revenue related dues, causing heavy financial burden on the telecom sector. In an earlier video, I think video 1 or 2, I discussed this AGR concept and I told you that Supreme Court has asked them to pay in 10 equal installments, annual installments, and it has given them a time that every year by this time you should pay your installment, and if you don't, then you should be liable to further penalties and interest, right? Now already the telecom sector in India is reeling under so many problems. Their business is not that good, even though the consumer base is large, but the charges are very, very competitive, and that is why their profit margins are very low. So had Vodafone been asked to pay, it would have been a very, very difficult thing for them. So it is kind of a relief for them as well. So India now will look at the order in detail and we'll see the loopholes and where we can make an appeal, and let's see how it goes further. Facebook critics start rival independent oversight board. Now these social media giants are being increasingly put under scrutiny by the public and by the media because they have become mammoths and they can basically impact every aspect of our lives, including influencing election results. And this has been a problem throughout the world. Now, Facebook was supposed to create an oversight board which would basically check what is hate speech, objectionable content on the platforms, right? And to filter that out. Also, fake news would also come under its ambit in the longer run, right? But it had announced such a board in 2018, but still it has not been able to set it up. Now its rivals, including one of the founders who actually had to go to jail as well. So the prominent rivals and the critics of this company are saying that we will make an independent oversight board and we will be checking Facebook and we will basically bring out the double standards of Facebook in not checking hate speech, etc. Right? So let us see what this news is saying. It is being launched by a group of prominent Facebook critics to rival the company's own. Now why? They are also saying that Facebook already is being used to influence the US presidential election. As a matter of fact, even during the earlier election, there were allegations that Facebook was used to manipulate elections, and similar allegations have been made in India as well, and more so in the case of hate speeches. And the partiality and impartiality of Facebook has been called to question time and again. So there is a big need. But then again, countries throughout the world have to now really take a call, because these companies like Facebook and Twitter, they have become big enough to set their own narrative. And if they're not brought under any regulatory oversight, maybe over the years, they would actually be setting the narrative, and they could even stall governments or bring the fall of governments, because their power and reach has become immense. So there is a need to bring these social media mammoths under some form of control and oversight. Why? The group says Facebook is taking too long to set up its oversight panel, which they argue is too limited in its scope and autonomy, warning that Facebook is already being used to undermine the integrity of the US presidential election, and are calling for proper independent scrutiny of the company. The announcement came after Facebook set its own quasi-independent oversight board, which has faced numerous delays since the company announced its creation in 2018, will launch in October. So they have been basically delaying its formation and operations. Now, what is Facebook's oversight board? It is a panel intended to rule on thorny content issues, such as when Facebook or Instagram posts constitute hate speech. It will be empowered to make binding rulings on whether posts or ads violate the company's rules, and any other findings it makes will be considered guidance by Facebook. So this board is to be constituted, and it has got, Facebook has basically brought out the constitution as well. Initially 4 members, then it would be 8 members, some eminent people, but Facebook is delaying the formation of this board. So then again, I'm saying that there is a very, very big need to independently regulate these mammoths, because they will become a menace in the future. IRDAI lists LIC, GIC, New India as systematically important. So we'll see in this article what are domestic systematically important insurers. Basically, these are the companies that are considered too big to fail in normal parlance, but that tag in itself comes with a lot of problems, because when a company starts thinking that it is too big to fail, it becomes more casual in its approach towards approaching risks, because it feels that even if something goes wrong, the government would come and basically rescue them at the end of the day. Now that is a very wrong thinking, and even if government were to come and rescue them, the loss that they would incur would be huge to the economy. And the proper functioning of such companies, be it insurers or any other sector, is very, very vital for the proper and smooth functioning of Indian economy. And that is why IRDAI would be listing them as domestic systematically important insurers. And when they come under this category, they would be subjected to increased scrutiny. So let us see. Given the nature of operations and their systematic importance, the regulator has asked these 3 public sector insurance to raise the level of corporate governance, identify all relevant risks, and promote a sound risk management culture. So this is very important, because number 1, they would think that they are too big to fail. Number 2, they think that they are playing with public money. It's not going out of their own pocket. So we can be more easygoing and we can, take more risks. And number 3, at the end of the day, come what may, Government of India will come and save us. So that could lead to a very, very big and dangerous situation. So that is why they have been put under this list. Now there are some parameters as well as to why they are listed as DSIIs. We'll just get to know of that as well. As domestic SIIs, companies will be subject to enhanced regulatory supervision. Now what are DSIIs? DSIIs refer to insurers of such size, market importance, and domestic and global interconnectedness. So size, market importance, and interconnectedness, both domestic and global, whose distress or failure would cause a significant dislocation in the domestic financial system, like I told you. So that is why it is important. So size, market importance, and interconnectedness, both domestic and global. Their continued functioning is critical for the uninterrupted availability of insurance service to the national economy. Too big to fail. DSIIs are perceived as insurers that are too big or too important to fail. Such a perception and the expectation of government support may amplify risk taking, reduce market discipline, create competitive distortions, and increase the possibility of distress in future. Because number one, like I said, it is public money, it's not going out of their own pocket, and number two, they expect that government will come and save them because of such a big exposure that they have and the vitality they have to the economy. So they have to be basically brought under greater regulatory supervision even before they fail or get into such a situation. Thus, DSIIs should be subjected to additional regulatory measures to deal with the systematic risks and moral hazard issues. Now, what are the parameters to identify DSIIs? Size in terms of total revenue, including premium underwritten and value of assets. So these are the important parameters. Number one, size, that is the total revenue. Then how much premium they have underwritten, that means how many insurance profiles they have actually opened, and the value of the assets that they have. So these are important parameters, and IRDAI has said that it will list DSIIs on an annual basis. Now at this point you might be wondering, what is IRDAI? So basically it is the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India. This is the regulator for insurance sector in India. So everything that has to do with the insurance sector, the regulatory guidelines would be given by IRDAI. And these DSIIs are insurers, three big insurers. That is why regulations are coming from IRDAI. So that is all about this article. Now let's see the next. The Doha-Kabul journey as a road to nowhere. So this is basically about the Afghan peace process that is going on, right? We have already discussed some of the aspects of the peace process and India's stand. Now this is an editorial from the Hindu, and the author has brought out some red flags or the problem or the contentious issues about this whole peace process. This is a very good editorial without any nonsense opinions. That is why we have included this in our coverage this day. So let us see. So he's pointing out some problems. Now let us see what are the problems. The first problem he says is that the perception or the vision about the future between Afghanistan government and the Taliban are quite different. He points out to the statements made by Abdullah Abdullah, which is the representative of the Afghan government as the main, you can say, the negotiator for the peace process, and Mullah Ghani Baradar, which is the main representative of the Taliban, and their statements basically they point in different directions. Whereas Abdullah Abdullah is talking about a liberal democratic society, Ghani Baradar is talking about an Islamic country. Now, can there be a middle ground? The author says it is quite difficult, and we have seen that it is not possible. As a matter of fact, throughout the Islamic world, we do not see any example of a liberal democracy, because somehow the kind of model that these people strike does not fit in with democracy. So this is the first one, that both have different visions for the future. Whereas Afghan government is looking for a liberal democracy, the Taliban is looking for an Islamic emirate in Afghanistan, and there cannot be any middle ground. Now the second one is that how involved will the US be once intra-Afghan talks take shape? Basically, I have told you why US is enabling these talks, because US wants to pull out of Afghanistan. And I've told you that US does not lose wars, it basically loses interest. And US now has lost interest in Afghanistan, and US is in a hurry to pull out of Afghanistan before the November election, so that Mr. Trump can claim another diplomatic victory that he has won in Afghanistan and he has brought the troops back, because that was one of the promises that he made in his election rallies when he was running for the president in 2016. So he said, let's bring our troops back home and I will end all wars. So he's basically trying to get these people or the American troops back to Afghanistan, and they're looking for a quick exit. Now, the same thing the article is saying, that US is basically not looking at any political settlement for Kabul, or it does not really care about what happens to Afghanistan when once it leaves. Basically, US is looking for an exit from Afghanistan as early as possible before the presidential election. And Trump will claim American achievements, that Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan has been neutralized, Osama bin Laden has been killed, the Taliban has severed its relationship with external actors, including Al Qaeda. Elections and democracy in Afghanistan are back, and intra Afghan dialogue is taking place. So we have no role because Afghanistan, now they will say, America will say that Afghanistan is a sovereign country, so we should not meddle into their affairs. So this is a double speak. So this is the second reason that America is not sincere. It just wants to get out of it. And as soon as America gets out of this mess or this problem, there is going to be a big explosion in terms of violence and intersectarian conflicts in Afghanistan. And that brings us to the third point, that American exit from Afghanistan physically and politically would rupture the intra-Afghan dialogue process, right? And most importantly, Taliban would again go back to violence. As a matter of fact, during all these talks, and there were preconditions for talks that violence should stop, Taliban did not agree to the preconditions, and even between these talks, Taliban is resorting to violence. So it is the only thing that it knows. Now, even the Afghan government was not very reluctant from the beginning to talk with Taliban, but US basically pressurized Afghan government to talk to Taliban, and it said that we would cut your aid if you don't talk with Taliban. And secondly, recently Loya Jirga was also convened in Afghanistan, which is the highest tribal council in Afghanistan, and its decisions are taken as the last word. So even Loya Jirga was basically pressurized by America to favor talks with Taliban. Now, outside this government framework of talks, there are also fears among multiple sections such as minorities and women, and they had the worst life under the Taliban. So they fear that once Taliban comes back to power, their life would again become hell. Now, what has happened? Because of some sort of a democracy last few years, so there have been creation of certain institutions of liberal democracy within Afghanistan, and Afghans have started to look forward to a bright future. But if Taliban comes back to power, it would be back to square one. So for them, negotiating with Taliban and reaching a middle ground will be a tough assignment, because Taliban wants absolute Islamic Emirate, and that does not go well with the notion of democracy, especially for minorities and women. Now, the next question is, what does the Taliban want? Clearly, Taliban does not want an electoral process. As a matter of fact, like I said, once US is out, Taliban will resort to large-scale violence, because that is the only thing that Taliban knows. So there is an element of naivety among those who believe that Taliban is transformed and will find middle ground for the Afghan government. And if you remember, we discussed that basically we are dealing with Taliban 2.0. They have changed somewhat their outlook and functioning, but still their overall ideas, especially with respect to women and minorities, are the same. And they don't believe in electoral processes. They only believe in violence. For Taliban, it would be nothing short of an Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Fifth, the Taliban has been waiting for the last 2 decades for international troops to leave, and then it will unleash its violence. It would wait for a few more months to see the last American soldier exit Afghanistan. Then it would return to what it knows the best, that is violence. And in past, this violence has been targeted at 3 actors: the international troops, Afghan government, and Afghan people. And Taliban has been employing violence as primary strategy to achieve what it wanted. So now that Taliban sees that the policy of violence has given them the dividends of getting back to power, so they would not be giving that up. As a matter of fact, they would ramp up the violence in Afghanistan. That's what these lines are saying. Like I said, that even during the talks, they are resorting to violence. Despite the February 2020 agreement with the US in Doha, the Taliban never stopped from using violence. Once the Americans leave, it would be back to strategy that has yielded maximum dividends: violence. The sixth reason, the return of regional great game. The regional great game is basically played between Pakistan, Iran, China, Russia, and India. They all have stakes in Afghanistan. Now, Afghanistan is very important geopolitically because it sits in the middle of a very important strategic area. This is Afghanistan. Now, basically, the great game was a geopolitical tussle that started in 1830 between UK or the Great Britain and Russia, because both of them were expanding their territories in Asia, and they increasingly came close to each other in Afghanistan. So Afghanistan was kind of a buffer between the territories of Russia and the United Kingdom. Both wanted to be world powers. So that was a great game. Now, A new great game is being played in the region. Again, the center is Afghanistan and the players have changed. It is now India. See, this is India. This is basically POK. Then China. Then Pakistan. Then Central Asian countries like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan and Iran. Now see what Pakistan does. Now Pakistan has a military doctrine that if India ever invades into Pakistan, they will fall back into Afghanistan and Afghanistan will be their strategic backyard. They will recuperate or regroup in Afghanistan and then they will launch a massive, possibly nuclear attack on India. That is what their fantasy world that the Pakistanis live in. Now they use this Afghan land as a safe haven for launching terror attacks. Now Afghanistan was home to many sites where terrorists were trained. Now Pakistan is not only messing with India but also with Iran. See, it shares border. Now basically again, Iran is what? Shia. Pakistan is Sunni. It's Sunni majority country. So Pakistan also uses this border of Afghanistan to make some attacks, some extremist terrorist attacks in Iran as well. So it is using Afghanistan. Now everybody wants a piece of Afghanistan. India wants a stable and secure Afghanistan. Why? Because number one, so that it can counter Pakistan. Now if India has good friendship with Afghanistan, then we can basically encircle Pakistan from both sides and we can basically check Pakistan. Number two, Afghanistan, like I said, is basically India's gateway to Central Asia. These Central Asian countries are very, very important. They have resources like uranium and other important minerals, and they also have population which could be a potential market for Indian products. And basically even Indian products are already popular in these markets, but India does not have a direct access. Why? Because Pakistan is sitting in between. So India basically needs a gateway into that, and for that India basically wants Iran and Afghanistan on its side. So I have already told you that there is Chabhar port. From Chabhar port there would be a road that would come to Afghanistan. Then in Afghanistan there is a Garland highway, Delaram Zaranj highway, which will enable India to provide supplies to entire Afghanistan and also provide access to Central Asia. So that is why Afghanistan is important for India. Now we have covered Pakistan and India. For China, again Afghanistan is important because it sits in the path of, I've already shown you the CPEC, another vein is running through Afghanistan. So their BRI project is important. Again, Afghanistan has many minerals and China is hungry for minerals, and that is why it has also subjugated the Tibet nation, right? So Afghanistan is very, very rich in natural resources which China is eyeing. And then again, China can also have greater access to Central Asia through Afghanistan. So again, Afghanistan is important for China. Then Russia also wants Afghanistan because Russia through Central Asian countries and Afghanistan could increase its influence in the whole region. So everybody is trying to make some space into Afghanistan. Now because Taliban has close links with Pakistan, so for now it seems that Pakistan would be having a greater say if Taliban comes to power, and the signs are somewhat like that only, that Taliban will be having a say in Afghan government. Plus China would also have a greater say in Afghanistan because China and Pakistan are closer, and Russia is also coming closer to China these days. So maybe we don't know what really would happen, but there are chances that Afghanistan could slip away from India. So India needs to up its diplomatic outreach to Afghanistan and ensure that India has a solid presence in Afghan peace process as well, and also in the post-American pullout Afghanistan. So this is sort of a new great game that is being played out in Afghanistan. Now getting back to the article. As long as American troops and interests remain in Afghanistan, their role would remain limited. Now one should wait and watch on how the regional great game in Afghanistan is played and how it has shaped the Afghan endgame. The last point would be how history would judge American intervention in Afghanistan in the last 2 decades. If you really look at it, the American intervention has not been much of a success, you might say, because they have not been able to eradicate Taliban. Taliban has survived the war, and once US leaves, Taliban would be boasting that even US could not defeat us, we are invincible and within 5 to 10 years they would be back to what they were doing before US invaded Afghanistan in 2001. So this issue is not solved as of yet. So another CAG report, rupees 223 upgrade for 56 Mi-17s is untenable. So Mi-17s are famous helicopters in the Indian Air Force. They have been working with the Air Force for a very long time. So basically, because of the expanding operational requirements of the Air Force, some shortcomings were found because these are somewhat old helicopters. So there needed to be some upgrades. Now the upgrade proposal was flouted in 2002. Finally in 2017 an agreement was signed. In 2002 there were 90 Mi-17s. Now in 2017 only 56 left. Now they are set to phase out by 2024. So the 223 crore deal that has been signed, now basically they would be ready by 2021 or 2022, right? So for just for 2 years, this upgrade is very, very costly. That is what the CAG is saying. So he's saying that basically this deal should be scrapped. An upgrade of 90 medium lift Mi-17 helicopters of the Indian Air Force proposed in 2002 could not be achieved even after 18 years. As a result of which these helicopters were flying with limited capability, thus compromising operational preparedness during these years. And the expenditure of about 223 crore was not justified with limited life left in 56 of them. Ministry of Defense concluded a contract with Elbit Systems of Israel for the upgrade of copters in January 2017. After upgradation, only 56 of these would be left with less than 2 years of life. So it is a bad investment. You would not even make that investment for a car because they don't have any operational life left. The expenditure is being incurred for their upgradation is not justified. That is what the CAG is saying, and he's right. The 56 helicopters would be phased out by 2024. In addition, for their upgradation, HAL and BEL were to supply 1270 crore worth of essential components for which contract had not yet been concluded. So this is the one that has been concluded, 223, and again almost this would turn out to be 2000 crore rupees just for 2 years. So not at all a good deal. Now these helicopters had limitations for which they needed some upgradation, like operating in adverse weather, night conditions and electronic warfare systems. So Air Force initiated the proposal to upgrade 172 helicopters in 2002. Then it was accepted by DAC in 2005, and finally we are here in 2020 and 2024 they are to be phased out. So not a good proposal. National Medical Commission. So earlier there used to be Medical Council of India, which governed the higher education and the educational standards and qualification in medical field. So that is being replaced by National Medical Commission. Now MCI was scrapped because it was bogged with many problems including corruption and had got a very bad name, and it was basically derogating the quality and standards of medical education in India. So MCI was scrapped in 2018 and it was replaced by a board of governors which was basically looking after the functions of MCI. Then a bill was passed in 2019 for National Medical Commission, and now it has been notified as per the Gazette of India. So this has become now fully operational. So we'll see what National Medical Commission is all about. We'll also get to know about next, which would be a licensate test for doctor. So any doctor, even if he's passing out from AIIMS, he would have to give the next exam, and after passing the next exam would only be the doctor able to practice in India. So let us see this whole issue. The National Medical Commission (NMC) has replaced the Medical Council of India as per Gazette notification issued by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Now MCI was established in 1934 under Indian Medical Council Act 1933. What was the main function? Of establishing uniform standards of higher qualification in medicine and also recognition of medical qualifications in India and abroad. Now this was also a very big scam. So there were lots of people who could not get admissions into Indian medical colleges, even the private ones. So they went to countries in Eastern Europe like Romania, which was a very hot spot back then, and they would get their medical degrees from there and they would start practicing in India. Now basically these were Jhola Chhap doctors, or these were for doctors. They were not actual doctors because they did not pass any examination or they were not qualified enough. But they would basically pay the medical council and they would get their licenses to practice in India. So this was also one of the reasons that the MCI was scrapped. The old act was replaced in 1956 and a new act enacted in its place. The new act was further modified in 1964, 93 and 2001. Then the government dissolved MCI in 2018 and it was replaced by Board of Governors chaired by member of Niti Aayog. Now IMC Act stands repealed after the Gazette notification, and now the National Medical Commission Act has come into existence on 8th August 2019. Now what does it do? The change is aimed at bringing in reforms in medical education sector, especially aimed at replacing the MCI, which was tainted by corruption and other problems. The NMC will function as the country's top regulator of medical education. Now it will have 4 separate autonomous boards, one for undergraduate medical education, one for postgraduate medical education, then for medical assessment and rating, and finally ethics and medical registration. So all of them would be coming under this one body called the NMC, and it will have 4 separate autonomous boards. Now the next would be like a license test, like I told you, that any doctor, even if he's from AIIMS, he has to pass this next examination to practice medicine in India. So it would be a common final year MBBS examination, and it will be known as NEXT according to the new medical education structure under NMC. And this NEXT stands for National Exit Test. It will act as a licentiate examination to practice medicine, the criteria for admission to postgraduate medical courses, and also for screening of foreign medical graduates. So now this is a big thing and a good thing, that even you are coming from abroad after completing your medical education, you have to pass this examination in India and you have to get the license for pursuing medicine or for going for postgraduate medical courses. So this also removes the ambiguity that I told you about. Besides National Eligibility and Entrance Test, NEET, next will also be applicable to institutes of national importance such as AIIMS. So everybody would be covered under NEXT in a bid to ensure common standard in medical education sector in the country. And just a news for your PT that NEET is conducted by NTA, because NEET was in news. There were basically many debates whether it should be conducted or not. So you should know that NEET is conducted by National Testing Agency. New guidelines to regulate extraction of groundwater. A very, very good news, because in our country there has been unabated use of groundwater, unabated extraction, and because of that the groundwater levels have gone exceedingly low in many states, and many states are facing this problem now. And in states like Punjab, the levels have gone down, far too down, that there are now traces of even uranium and other heavy metals in the water that is being extracted from underground. Now it takes a long time to recharge groundwater, but the rate at which it is being extracted is very fast, so that is not being recharged, and that would again lead to a problem not just for underground water but also for the rivers that flow in the region. So this whole thing is connected, so that is why we need to conserve groundwater. So basically now everybody would need to get an NOC, including the residential apartments and complexes in the cities. They would need to get an NOC. That NOC would be valid for 2 to 5 years to extract groundwater, and also now you will have to pay for extracting groundwater. Up to 25 meter cube per month if you extract, you don't have to pay anything, but more than that you'll have to pay. So it would also ban any unauthorized underground water extraction that is done by water suppliers that we see throughout India, and also the so-called mineral water suppliers that basically use this water for free, but they are going to cause a big ecological disaster in future. So this is a very good step that the government of India has come out with. Now let us see the nitty-gritties of these guidelines. It would be mandatory for new and existing industries, group housing societies and private water supply tankers to get a no objection certificate, NOC, for withdrawal of groundwater. So group housing societies, private water supply tankers and industries, either new or existing, they would have to get an NOC for 2 to 5 years. Now there are also some categories that are excluded or exempted. The guidelines have exempted 5 categories from getting an NOC. Individual domestic consumers in both rural and urban areas for drinking water and domestic uses. So if you are not living in a group housing society, you're an individual domestic consumer, either in rural or urban area, you would not have to get an NOC. Rural drinking water supply schemes, either state or central, again, no NOC. Armed forces establishments and central armed police forces establishments in both rural and urban areas. Agricultural activities. So in a way it does not address the exact problem, because such problems still exist, and one of the main reasons is not regulation over the overuse of groundwater in agricultural sectors, especially in the green revolution belt. So there should have been some control over that as well. Micro and small enterprises drawing groundwater less than 10 cubic meter per day. Now, if you don't follow these compliances, you would attract a penalty between rupees 50,000 and rupees 10 lakhs. NOC will be required for groundwater extraction for drinking and domestic use for residential apartments or group housing societies in urban areas where local government water supply agency is unable to supply the requisite amount of water. So first of all, they have to rely on local government water supply agency, and after that, if that is not sufficient or not enough, then they can make their bore wells and whatnot, and they can extract groundwater, but they need to get an NOC, and they also would need to pay. The entities will also have to pay charges. The NOC issued under the new guidelines will be valid for 2 to 5 years depending on the entity. Non-compliance, again, penalty from 50,000 to 10 lakh rupee depending on the violation. The guidelines say extraction of groundwater for commercial use by industries, infrastructure units and mining projects without an NOC will be considered illegal, and they will be liable to pay environmental compensation. So again, a good thing. The guidelines authorize district authorities to take action. So who will be taking action? District authorities. In overexploited assessment units, no objection certificate shall not be granted for groundwater abstraction for any new industry except those falling under MSME category. So again, a good thing that where there is overexploitation of groundwater, no NOC for new industries, only the existing or the new MSME category would get the license, but not for any big industry. So good step. Now see, the problem is the initiatives by government, whoever is in power, are generally good. It is the problem in implementation. So let's hope that the implementation is correct. Let's also see the pricing model that they are going to follow. I'm not going to read it out to you. You can just take a screenshot and you can analyze it later. Like I said, from 0 to 25 meter per cube, you don't have to pay. Then after that, there are charges, and there are charges for different types of people who are using this groundwater. Again, groundwater in itself is very important, and it is also very important source of water for river, and also it absorbs waters from river. So it is a bidirectional connection between rivers and groundwater. So saving groundwater is also saving the rivers, and saving the rivers is also saving groundwater. So both need to be conserved, and they need to be used judiciously. So good initiative. Let's see how it plays out. So folks, thank you for watching this video. That is all. If you like our videos, please do subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new videos that we post. Also, if you like this video, please press the like button. And also, please connect with us on our Instagram page, UPSC for Everyone. So see you next time. Till then, stay safe, stay happy, and have a great day. Namaste and Jai Hind.